Hello. So, this is a talk on missing obvious signals. I'd say that if you're in the wrong room, you should leave now, but this is actually the only room that is running a talk. So my name is Jay Freeman, but everyone tends to know me as Sorek. And so I tend to begin my talks with a little explanation of who I am, so you know why I'm on stage speaking to you. So, I run Cydia, which is the alternative to the App Store on jailbroken phones. But I've done a number of other projects and a lot of libraries and tools that are used by people who use jailbroken devices. Now, this is a picture that I typically give conferences to use for me. Actually, 360 iDev did not use it. But to be honest, I mean, it is, I think it's a 9-year-old picture at this point, and maybe this picture is a little more descriptive of me. This is from Jailbreaking 2011. So Jailbreaking is a conference we have that's actually entirely focused on jailbreaking. You might be surprised we actually have a conference entirely focused on jailbreaking. We actually have that many people. Which I think gets into what my job function actually is. I am mostly a community manager for the jailbreaking community. So I sit down, I talk to people, I talk to developers. I give a lot of talks at conferences, including conferences like 360 iDev. Now I do a lot of development. This is actually me at a club in Vegas at a conference doing development. By the way, this is what was going on behind me at that moment. I just released something that wasn't working quite well, so I had to frantically work on getting a new fixed copy released. But conferences like 360 iDev are really where I end up spending a lot of my time. I'm actually sometimes surprised at how much of my time is spent at conferences as opposed to doing development work. In 2009, I was at, I believe this was the first 360 iDev event, and I gave a talk. It was the launch of the payment system for the Cydia store. So I really care a lot about 360 iDev. This is actually my favorite iPhone development conference, and it's something that I think the parts of the jailbreaking community have actually grown along with this conference as this conference itself has grown. So I wanted to take, this is the last talk actually of the, there's a panel after this, but this is the last talk of the day and the entire event. I wanted to take a second to talk a little bit about 360 iDev and why I like it so much. So this is a community conference. It's a bunch of people who are getting together who all love this. It's not run by a company that is has a vested interest in the entire thing, such as WWDC or things like that, which gives them a lot of flexibility and support. I mean, the idea that I'm even up here speaking as somebody in the jailbreak community, some of the conferences have actually just told me to leave. In a way, also, this conference is an incubator for speakers. One of the first talks I gave was at 360 iDev. I'd given one, a really small one, a couple months earlier, but on jailbreaking and on Cydia and things like that. I believe that 360 iDev was my first large room experience. And this is something that some other speakers were saying a couple days ago, that 360 iDev is takes risks on speakers. And so it's the kind of experience where you might not realize that you're actually this is something you're going to love doing and you're actually going to be good at. And then 360 iDev has actually helped speakers out a lot doing that. I also say that this conference has a really good balance of stuff. So there's a lot of different activities, and so sometimes conferences will focus on a specific activity. I love that this conference actually has a good mixture of activities. And it's also a wide technical level. So for the last couple of years, I've been bringing other people from Sorek IT with me, a person who's only community manager and technical writing, somebody who only does business and contracts, and they've loved this conference as well. So actually, there was somebody who made a comment yesterday before about assuming everyone in the audience is developers. I don't think that's a fair assumption. And I think it used to be, I didn't quite check, I don't think there are really tracks anymore, but when I gave a talk in 2009, there was a track entirely just business of iPhone track. I also, to give an explanation of just how fun a lot of people who end up constructing this conference are. So there's a story to tell here, which is that when I first came here, I went up to get my name badge, and I said that, so they asked me what my name was, and I said last name Freeman, and they said, okay, I'm not really finding you. Okay, well, maybe it's under J, maybe you can try Sorek. They finally found it under last name from the planet Vulcan, first name Sorek. And I think that was Tom. I showed up at the conference, and he's like, Sorek! And I was like, yeah, okay. Also, then for 360 iDev 2009, the second half of the year, I was asked to produce a bio. And John ended up sending me a message saying, we can make a bio up, but those usually involve bears, Jedis, ninjas, pirates, and Baltimore in various combinations. He's not kidding. The bio that I ended up, the official bio, is Sorek hails from the planet Vulcan, where jailbreaking iPhones is a national pastime. Sorek excelled at the jailbreaking and decided to share his gift to the people of Earth. There was another bio, Jason slays wild bears in his free time when not running Aurora Feint and doing cool things like opening Open Feint to developers for free. There was the next year I showed up at the conference. I had pneumonia. I realized only as I was showing up, and there was a little mix-up with hotel rooms. I had actually failed to specify that I wanted a hotel room after some things. I showed up, and that got really loud really quickly. Yeah, I showed up, and Tom actually gave me his hotel room, which was really nice of him for the night. So again, Tom, by the way, is one of the co-organizers of the event when it started. He was one of the people who co-founded the event. Now, I was giving a workshop the next day for 8 hours. So I ended up spending the first 4 hours at urgent care, and then the latter 4 hours, I actually felt up for doing a workshop. But I had all my luggage with me because I was changing rooms, and they are never letting me forget the fact that somebody tweeted, the only conference I've ever attended with a 4-hour no-break session, and the speaker brought an extra pair of pants with him on stage. I swear it was my luggage. All right, so I've had an opportunity to give a number of talks at 360 iDev, and actually I've given a general session before. I gave a general session that was on the mobile application market. And this is a fairly intricate talk where I've got really just one massive slide that I'm constantly moving around. This talk has actually gotten more complicated over the years. I continue to give this talk. This is what the slide looks like now when I give it. But I'm no longer convinced that this is really what the genre of a general session 360 iDev is. Especially when you look at some of the really memorable moments that from the 360 iDevs of years past. I mean, we have, for example, Mike Lee's costumes. That's, by the way, he's dressed in a mariachi hat. This is actually a picture of him on the projector. He's standing over to the left. This was taken by somebody from the unofficial Apple weblog. I don't think that would work very well for me. Colin Donnell, who isn't here this year, and so I've decided to show a picture of him from forever ago, is also the talk that he gave last year is I think the one that ended up being most memorable for me. And he had this quote: "Objective-C is my boomstick," as he drew a stretched analogy to Army of Darkness in his life as a developer. Now, I actually think that now I forgot his name, but his hair actually looks a lot like Colin Donnell's hair. I think surprisingly, but. All right, so the talk that I'm giving today, actually, the idea for it, the concept for it, was come up with by my business partner, Pat, who's been here for the last couple years, but sadly is not here this year. He thought the conference wasn't going to be until next month, and so ended up scheduling something over it. He at Storic IT is what we call the suit. Now, this ended up being another picture I found of him using Google image search. So I didn't dig for this at all. This is like one of the first few pictures you end up finding of him. All right, so the talk is missing obvious signals. Now, I put this slide up earlier as the title slide, and as I typed this title slide, I realized this title doesn't even fit on this slide. So the first thing I missed that was obvious is I should have said missing the obvious. This is such a better title. It's actually easier to come up with content that fits this title than the title missing obvious signals. All right, so this talk involves a story of 360 iDev last year, and my visit to a friend of mine named Susanna, who's a roommate of an ex-roommate of mine from 2008 or something like that, who moved to Boulder and is studying causality and communication. I really thought that her thesis should be causality and communication, characterizing colossal columnated currents and conveying the craft of comprehensively clarifying complex concepts in the casual college curriculum. She was kind of excited, but she didn't go for it. So after the conference, I was scheduling that we were going to go hang out with her. And so actually, it says on the slide here. Why am I wearing the glasses? They don't actually allow me to see. What are you guys doing in Colorado? It's the same thing I do every year in Colorado, 360 iDev. Now, some of you may remember. Now, I was talking about September 13th. That this ended up being the day of the Boulder flood. So as we were leaving the conference, so one of the cool things about 360 iDev is we have this Glassboard app. We're getting push notifications from people talking to us, other people at the conference, and you can kind of all communicate with each other. People were talking about how they weren't able to even get to the airport. Now, I probably should have realized this was a problem for my trip up to Boulder, that if you can't even get to the airport, which is like right here, that this might actually be an issue. I'm getting phone calls on my projector system. All right. We're also getting emergency alerts. So emergency alert, if something calamitous is heading your way and you're an AT&T subscriber, you might receive a notification about it on your phone. So by the way, Verizon doesn't get these notices. And actually, I'm sorry, I screwed something up here. So Pat uninstalled this app. This is actually a very key part of the story. Pat uninstalled the Glassboard app because he was sick of getting these notices. And Pat uses Verizon. So Pat didn't actually get this AT&T notice. We then stopped at the Apple Store. The Apple Store, I needed to buy a new cable. The guy at the Apple Store was actually kind of excited that there was, he was just an employee at the Apple Store. It's not like, somebody who's actually like high up at Apple or anything. It's Storic. And so we talked for a little while. Pat walked out, because he's got stuff to do. And this guy asked what we were doing. I said we're going to Boulder. He's like, you're not going to get to Boulder. Like, no, we're going to go to Boulder. It's fine. I mean, it's just like right there. And he's like, no, I don't need it. The roads are really bad. And so we started looking it up online, and it turns out that, well, no, actually, we can get to Boulder. So if you keep going up north, it gets all bad. But if you actually go to Boulder, you're fine. The roads go fine to Boulder. Now, we get in the car. The rain is pretty bad. Now, I'm used to Chicago. I mean, honestly, we get rain constantly, and the rain is really bad. This is actually a high school computer science teacher posted this video. So I didn't really think anything of the rain. Pat didn't really think anything of the rain. We actually drive all the way over to Susanna's place. Now, at no point have I mentioned that I confirmed to Susanna that I should actually show up. So we sit outside. Now, I tell Pat that, by the way, she said she'd be available in the evening. I don't know if she's available right now yet. So we're just parked outside of her apartment, outside of her house for a little while, and we're just watching funny YouTube videos until such time as we may, get in contact with her. I send her a text message. This is the conversation we ended up having with her. When are you available? She says, well, I'm kind of battered down at my house right now with instructions to the Boulder County Office of Emergency Management to not go out unless it's an emergency. So it's sort of not available given the circumstances. Yeah, we've just been sitting in our car outside your house for like an hour. The rain seems pretty bad. Wait, what? So at this point, Susanna actually comes outside. Now, Pat had a phone call that he had to do. Pat had a meeting with a lawyer related to a previous company that he was a part of. And so now Pat's sitting on the phone in the front seat. I'm talking from the driver's seat back to Susanna and like hushed voices about just how bad the rain is in the situation. We end up going inside, and Pat stays outside. We're talking on the phone. And Susanna and I then talk to Susanna's housemate, who lives in the basement but can't because the basement is just water now. And so has been living upstairs and on the couch, and hearing about just how bad the situation is. But Susanna's like, well, what were you intending to do? And I was like, I don't know. I mean, I was intending to go to get food, but it sounds like we're not going to be able to even go outside. But Susanna didn't have food anyway, and Susanna and I both end up kind of just, I almost want to say that we semi-dared each other because we're just not the kind of person who really thinks that this is really a serious problem, which is a bad thing, by the way. And so we're like, we're going to go. And we then go get Pat from outside and get back in the car. Now, at this point, I make a hotel reservation just in case. So the hotel reservation is only like 5 miles south, and I go south because I know that if you go up north far enough, you're not going to be able to keep going north. So I'm going to go just like 5 miles south. We go get some food. So you can't tell that anything bad is happening when you're sitting inside of a restaurant. Everyone's having fun. The restaurant is just operating. In fact, we leave and there's no rain. It's done. We've waited out the storm. But on the way back, and in fact, we could tell that something was going on the way there, all the roads are now closed. And there's police officers everywhere, and there's just water flooding absolutely everything. The road is just water now. And we're now unable to even get back really to where Susanna lives. And Susanna's living there for 5 years, so she knows like every single little tiny path, and we try all of them, and we can't. So Susanna ends up deciding to just kind of like go through the woods, through like a place that she knows to get to her house, because Susanna, like me, is a little crazy. And I'm like, I'm not going to leave you. Like, I'm going to sit here in this parking lot and wait, which was actually a good idea because she did not get there. She determined there was like a river going through the forest, and so she ends up coming back. Now we're continuing to go around, and we're still not really finding anywhere to go. She's got this other idea for a path how to get there, and she's certain this one's going to work. It's just she didn't want to walk this long. So we end up going to this parking garage, and she starts walking there, and Pat and I, who now Susanna's very concerned about, start driving in order to go to our hotel. But we're just like, if you have any problems with this guaranteed path, please call us. Now, it turns out that Boulder is actually really difficult to get out of. So Boulder, if you're trying to go south on 36 and 36 is closed, it turns out that this river here, with all these reservoirs, if this is the problem, you can't go at all north. And there's only one road south getting out of here. And this one road south getting out of here actually was also flooded. So we couldn't even go south ourselves. We ended up going back to the parking garage where it turns out Susanna calls us on the way as well and says she's going back to the parking garage. None of us can get home. So this parking garage is actually, there's like this transformer. This is a really horrible noise. And no, I'm not playing audio because you don't want to hear this noise. This noise going on in the bottom floor of this parking garage where there's like some backup generator transformer or something that wants to explode. I don't know, due to the flood. Okay, so, and there's a reason, by the way, why I'm brushing through this story. Okay, so this parking garage has a bridge that actually connects across. So I actually get some pictures of us taking pictures over the bridge, because I love taking pictures of people taking pictures. The highway is just a river at this point. I decide what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to try to get us some supplies because I'm actually I'm kind of concerned that I dragged us into this situation. So I'm going to go. I go across the land bridge and I go try and search and I try to go in search of a vending machine. Now, I go through all the various apartment complexes. I actually find a vending machine that's out of order. I find one that's behind a locked door. I find a gas station that actually is one that Pat and I stopped back on the way to the parking garage in order to make certain that we had a full tank of gas. But I do not actually end up finding anything until at some point I get a text message from Susanna Pat saying that a wall of water containing debris and vehicles, according to the National Weather Service, is on its way down the mountain. Further descriptions that we got called it a 30-foot wall of water carrying debris, including vehicles, and that they're concerned where I was. So I kind of run back to the land bridge because the bottom of the land bridge is actually at the moral equivalent of sea level. So maybe I'm going to get trapped now on this side of the street, but I succeed. I get back. But I'm not done yet, because now I'm still concerned. I really feel that something needs to be done in order to make certain that we don't dehydrate. Susanna's actually been thirsty now for like a couple hours. I want to make certain that we actually have some food if we're going to be stranded there for days, something like that. I managed to figure out that there is a freeway entrance into the parking garage, bus-only freeway entrance. And I walk along it, and I managed to end up on the highway itself, which is this really post-apocalyptic feeling of walking along the highway where there's no cars, where half the highway is destroyed. And it's like I was driving on this freeway a little bit earlier today. The water was a little bit ludicrous in the sense that the water was actually kind of rushing up from this grate. I managed to actually get across to another exit, and I take that exit, I go all the way down, I managed to actually find a store, and I managed to, there's a person there who's actually like selling stuff. This is awesome, I get across it. So I buy 4 gallons of water and a bag full of meat sticks and granola bars, and I go on my way back, which is actually was kind of hard. So I'm carrying now 4 freezing gallons of water. This is actually a mistake that I made. I bought cold bottles of water that are causing my hands to get numb. It takes me twice as long to get back as it took me to get there. I'm actually like collapsing. My arms are collapsing. It's not like trying to hold all this stuff. And the thing that I keep going through in my mind is that I just absolutely need to get this stuff back there. I mean, if nothing else, what's my other option at this point? Die on the freeway. But I don't want to leave any of the stuff because I want to get this stuff back so that we have stuff. So there's this thought that's actually playing in my mind as I actually finally get there. I'm going to walk up these stairs, and on the way I'm going to end up having a heart attack because at this point I'm actually kind of exhausted. And there's going to be this guy that they're going to find 3 days later, surrounded by supplies, his dead body at the bottom of the parking garage. All right. So Pat, in the meantime, has actually managed to reach out. He's gotten a bunch of people to actually help on Twitter. People are like offering, like Boulder was awesome. Like people were like, hey, if you live anywhere nearby, some of my friends, they might be willing to like put you up in their house, or not live, if you're like stranded somewhere near our friends. The Boulder news station, the news anchor was tweeting and like trying to help people out. And so Pat was learning a lot about what need to get in and out of Boulder. We ended up, however, sleeping in the car that night with, though, a lot of supplies, none of which were used. I got back with a bunch of water. Now that you have water, you're no longer thirsty. And once you have supplies, well, you can eat later. So it turns out that then over the course of the evening, the rain started to dissipate, and this potentially life-risky thing that I was doing, wandering along the flooded highway, was actually totally for naught. We succeed in getting back to our Town Place Suites Marriott through a rather convoluted path in the morning. Actually, I left a gallon of water and a bunch of meat sticks and some granola bars next to some guy who was sleeping in a sleeping bag near where our car was, because it was just like, all right. So the goal of this talk, now the thing that Pat was having me came up with an idea for how this talk would actually work was to go over the things that were in essence missed. Because I found one of the funny parts about the story is to look at the fact that Pat was involved in this whole thing. I think Pat's actually sane, I'm not. And I think that Pat would have actually realized that something bad was happening if it weren't for the fact that Pat missed every single one of the signals that occurred during the course of this thing. And then I was coming up with ways in which you could avoid these mistakes. And I started thinking through and analyzing out the whole framework for this. In the process of this, though, I realized that this entire talk up to this point no longer actually made sense once I actually got to the conference. It no longer felt meaningful, let me put it that way, especially after, I'm not standing up here, I'm not telling you the world's going to end, I'm not telling you to all hate yourselves, but somehow like this little comedy skit routine, I started to feel a little bit lacking. I started thinking about like if only I had done a talk instead on how to prepare for opportunity, which is something that I think that actually I would have had a good way of describing, but then I realized something myself, I'm missing the obvious. There's something actually on the way, I was driving in the car with Tom, and I'm sorry, I forgot your name, Rance yesterday. I started thinking we should actually start asking ourselves constantly, are we missing the obvious? Are we missing the obvious? I asked myself, am I missing the obvious? And in fact, I am, which is that usually I don't actually have a title on my talk. So I showed up at AltConf, and they had actually, I'd given them a title, they didn't record it. So I ended up with this blank spot on the conference thing, and ended up after 4 days of being at WWDC after Swift, actually no, 3 days, right? After being at WWDC after Swift was released, I ended up doing a talk on Swift, how it works at a really low level, how all the object layouts work, how to introspect it using tools, etc. So I started thinking to myself, that's what I normally do. I normally figure out talks as I arrive at a location. So I went to everyone at the party last night, and many of you may have actually experienced me almost running up to you and just start interrogating you with questions. What do you do? Why are you here? What do you want at this conference? Was there anything you feel you didn't get? What question would you ask everyone here? I learned a few things. First of all, most people here are here for networking, which is, of course, an obvious goal of a conference. But it's something where the one thing that I think is non-obvious is that people who said that this was the best conference they were going to for purposes of networking. That they were going to other conferences, including WWDC, and they found 360 iDev to be better for networking because of some of the properties I had listed earlier. And then in addition to some of those, they listed the fact that the conference was small and that the conference tended to clump together and go to events. So rather than having parties, for example, all over Denver, we tended to have a couple parties that people tended to go to. The next thing is that a lot of people were saying that what they were really interested in getting was inspiration. So I started thinking to myself about what was actually inspiring, and also the question they wanted to ask people was, why do you do the things that you do? So now the reason why I didn't cut that whole story out of this, you might be wondering at this point, why did I waste the first 20 minutes of this talk with a story if I'm going to change the topic of my talk anyway, is that the moral of that story, not moral, the meaningful moment in that story that when I tend to tell it, when I'm not telling it about Pat, is the moment when I'm walking back and I'm trying to provide myself a reason why I'm still walking back. And I start telling myself, I actually started repeating to myself this idea that I'm playing this game to win. I don't just want to sort of maybe I'll have some probability of surviving. I want to make certain that I have every single piece of equipment. I want to make certain that I have a full tank of fuel. I want to make certain that I have all of the food and water that I might need in order to make certain that I'm prepared over the course of the next few days. And if this is the moment where I can actually maybe make that happen before the 30-foot wall of water comes, that might be a better place to do it. Now that said, I'm not saying that's smart. I'm just saying that that was what my motivation in that moment was. And the reason, of course, why I was doing that is because I care about these people, and I didn't want anything to happen to them. I felt like in some ways responsible for the fact that I kind of dragged them into the situation. So now in thinking about this, I realized, I was like, if only I could figure out some way of fitting that goal, that moral, into the missing the obvious signals talk. And I don't even have a description on this talk, so it's not like any of you actually had some expectation of what I was talking about. For the last 3 days, you've all been asking me, what are you talking about? So why am I sitting here trying to force things into a particular framework for talk? So let's go back, let's take missing the obvious, let's scratch that title out and say why we continue to do the things that we do. All right, so this is actually something that I wrote an article about a few weeks ago regarding why I do all the things that I do and all these various motivations for them. And I think that there's some interesting motivations that people have. One of which is because we find it to be fun. Now, I think this one's fairly obvious. I think this is a motivation a lot of people get into this sort of thing in the first place. So I don't think I need to go into this one that much. But because we must to survive, so this could be anything from food or shelter, obvious things, but also just the people you love and the fact that you're the ability to get people to care for you, things like that, care about you, things like that. These are things that if you don't have that, you really kind of feel like you're not even really living. This is another thing you must do to survive. Because we have no choice. Now, there's an obvious one of this if you're forced. If somebody is actually, if you actually, you've lost control of your muscles and you're actually somebody is maneuvering you through things. But that's kind of an awkward one. You start thinking, wasn't that sort of like somebody gunpoint? That's like to survive, right? Obsession. I actually find myself oftentimes doing things that I kind of know are harmful to me, and I feel like I have very little choice in the matter because of the fact that I just can't get my brain to stop doing it. And sometimes people medicate in order to get around these issues. Sometimes people succeed in overcoming them with therapy or whatever. I'm not going to talk about how you get over anything like that because I have no clue. But I'm going to mention that that is another reason why we end up doing the things that we do. Another one is because we just don't really know that there is an option. We don't even see that we're doing it. It's something that we're doing. It's something that might be habitual. It's something that it might just be something that we've just been acclimated to doing over the course of our lives. And it never occurs to us that we're doing anything and that there might be something else we could be doing instead. So you're kind of just walking through the default motions. Another one, because we said we would. And this kind of touches a little bit on some of these other ones, but I think there's a little bit of difference there. One of the aspects is pride. If you say you're going to do something and then you actually do it, you start to feel good about yourself and the things that you think you're able to do. Another one is, and this was one that more connects back to some of the other ones, is that if you say you're going to do something, you want other people to believe you're going to do that, and you want other people to be held to that responsibility so that way you can actually like get things done, because otherwise everyone's just saying they're going to do stuff and no one ever actually does anything, nothing ever. Yeah. So, because we were taught to. This one here I think is one of the more interesting ones. So, I grew up with a value system that states that essentially, I mean, not explicitly, but kind of implicitly, and I think a lot of people in Western culture, and probably in some aspects of Eastern culture, I just don't know much about it, but I always hear it as a stereotypically Western culture problem, grow up with this idea that building things, constructing things, owning things, leading people, and even the idea of having the pride in saying that in doing the things that you said you would do. These are in essence values. These are not necessarily truths that are encoded into life. It might very well be that the thing that we really should all be doing is giving up on all the things that we're currently doing and just finding people who care about us and want to spend time with us and making by on a much simpler living, as opposed to sitting around killing ourselves every night, trying to construct the thing, trying to build an empire, trying to make a ton of money. These again are these are ideas that have been encoded into us over the course of years of living our lives, over the way that we've watched the television, the media, our parents, watching the people that other people looked up to and trying to emulate them. So I feel like in some ways we should sometimes be questioning that. There are, however, I think there is one more that I think is almost even less obvious, and that's sometimes it's because we hate ourselves. So in the article that I ended up writing a few weeks ago, I made a comment about how one of the reasons is masochism. I seriously sometimes believe I do not deserve anything better in life than to slave away on things that have no long-term value and that which people may or may not appreciate. Sometimes I'm not even certain that life has anything but such to offer, so it doesn't matter whether or not I consider it sane. So this idea comes up. It doesn't necessarily mean that like right now, I'm not sitting here, like I'm not doing this because I'm masochistic. But sometimes I find myself kind of going through motions that just feel really frustrating and feel really irritating. And when I'm thinking about my previous comments about why I do things, it doesn't really seem to align in anything in there. And I start coming back to this idea that I'm actually just kind of like, I was feeling bad today, and I kind of feel like I'm going to keep feeling bad today, and so I'm going to do these things that make me keep feeling bad today. Again, I'm not saying it's sane at all. I mean, arguably part of the thesis of this entire talk is that I'm a little bit not sane. But in writing this article, I also I pointed at people about this thing that I think a lot of people should try out called Futilitris, which is it's a flash game. It's actually more of a piece of art. It's a game of Tetris that is just the most infuriating thing that you will ever play. Now, the feeling of playing Futilitris is the same feeling that I had 2 days before working on the payment system, the accounting backend, and the user management mechanism of Cydia. I had this exact same feeling. And so the quote that actually Futilitris gives you is, every accomplishment I do is outweighed by the need to do more. And my mistakes never go away. They just glare at me forever, even though they're small and meaningless. There's not even points. It just gets harder to see and slower to get things done until finally you don't want to go on. Now, in this particular case, I draw this analogy back to like what I was working on at Cydia. There was this like little mistake that I had made a while ago where I had a bug in the user ID generator, where it would generate a user ID for somebody. Normally, it goes in the database, and you're going to get the next item. It sounds like I'm going to say that there's a bug in the way that I did multi-threading or something, but that was fine. The database was doing it. But I was actually trying to import something invalid into the database, and so the transaction was failing, and I very stupidly had a retry. And the retry was actually just, I had many servers all spinning, retrying, adding users for weeks, until I had gone from user ID 8 million up to user ID 460 million. And now all user IDs, and users can actually see their user ID, they all give me their user ID. It says 462 million something or other. And I get this feeling inside like, oh, I screwed up. It doesn't matter. I mean, nobody cares what that number is. But every time I see 46, I am reminded of a mistake that I made. And it's one that I can't fix. So, yeah. Now, to kind of take some of these, so there's one, I'm not going to list it as a reason, really. There's kind of one more reason why we do things, but in a way, it's just kind of like a different way of putting together all these previous things. And I'm actually going to go refer back to Mike Lee in 2010, where he gave a very different talk. And he talked about changing the world, and about how, as software developers, we kind of have responsibility to make the world a better place by being engineers, by being software developers. And that by going through and seeing all the things that can be done in the world, and that actually realizing that there are problems, and realizing that the world is a system that can be engineered, and that our knowledge of software engineering gives us knowledge of engineering and that we should therefore spend our time attempting to solve these problems is a good thing. He made this argument that we should all be going out and trying to do things in order to make the world a better place. Now, some of you here may have gone to his talk on discussion of ethics. So I say some of you because this was the breakout session, not the panel, where he talked about the ethics of software development and the things that we do, specifically the kind of things that we do in this audience. I actually thought where he was going to go with this is bugs as an ethical issue. So this is actually an article from last night where apparently an Android application had some kind of weird retry policy, and it actually took the National Weather Service offline. They were unable to disseminate updates, things like the Boulder flood. I actually found this. I wasn't even looking for this. I was like looking for information about floods and the National Weather. I was trying to get the update from the National Weather Service from 2010, and I ended up finding this article instead saying that the work of people like us ended up causing the National Weather Service to no longer being able to do their job right now, while they're attempting to scramble and deal with the fact that there's this app that's going amok on their network. Now, of course, it's the biggest issue in the world. I mean, you might argue, like, they're going to use Akamai and they're going to have denial of service flood protection. But the thing is, they didn't know that they needed to have any of that because everyone was using it at a lower rate. And it's like, I mean, and things do denial of service occasionally, like Reddit or Yahoo or I wasn't going to say Yahoo. I was going to say Reddit or Tumblr or Facebook, or et cetera, will end up going offline. This is the kind of thing where I feel like it actually kind of is our responsibility to think very carefully about the things we release and try to make certain that we don't have unintended ramifications. We actually like work through edge cases and we attempt to test situations that we're not certain would come up before we end up just releasing something to the public where it could cause damage. Now, Mark Zuckerberg, of course, with Facebook, there's this famous concept that they have, move fast and break things. Now, I don't know how many of you have been paying attention this year. I went to the Facebook conference, F8 this year, where he stood up on stage and started explaining that, you know, when you move fast and break things all the time, it turns out things don't work. And they've kind of finally started noticing this themselves. And so as Facebook developers, many of us had experienced this pain where we build an application and then it just stops working, and then they kind of fix it, and then it stops working, and then they kind of fix it. And it's not us, it's them. And then we'll release it, and then they'll remove the API, and they'll say, well, now it works differently. They finally realized this is actually a serious problem. They're now versioning APIs, and even internally they've changed their policies. They've added a new quote, in fact, move fast with stable infra, which I was really happy about, although as Zuckerberg said on stage, it does not have the same ring as the previous one. It almost even sounds a little awkward to say. So this kind of led into the panel then that Mike had, which was ethics in our industry, which almost all of you would have attended because this was a general session, where he ended up asking a question. What is a difficult ethical decision you've been forced to make in the course of your profession? And of course, this ended up leading towards the idea of things like the NSA having access to all the things that we do because we put them all on computers now. We have everything on iPhones. We have everything that has microphones in our pockets and cameras, etc. Now, I'm actually not going to say that much about this. You think probably that this is actually where I'm trying to go with this. Maybe a little bit, but not really. Instead, I'm going to actually focus on some of the other answers where I think actually describing things that were costly, not things that were difficult. And so the difference that I'm going to point out. So the example is the idea that I believe in this. I ethically believe that this is to be the case. This person wants me to violate that. He'll give me a bunch of money for that. It is difficult for me to maintain my ethical position. Sorry, it is costly for me to maintain my ethical position in exchange for that. But in fact, in a way, it wasn't difficult because I believe so strongly in this ethical position that, it was, I think it was during Mike Lee, during his breakout session, he made the comment that for, it turns out for $1 million I wouldn't sell out. For $100 million I wouldn't sell out. He got to some point, it was like $100 billion or whatever, that he said, yeah, I would sell you guys out for that. Because, at some point, because his comment there, and I think this is where it really comes down to difficulty, is that somebody else made the point to him, with the $100 billion, you could save a lot of lemurs. And that's where you start getting ethical trade-offs, where you start asking the question, well, I could sell out some users for this, and then in exchange, I could help the world in this other way because I managed to accumulate money through something else. I think that's where all the difficult decisions come from. And so I'm going to take then a break, and I'm going to go back to my title slide, and I'm going to cross out we, put in I. I'm going to say very specifically why I continue to do the things that I do. Because I actually think that there's a non-obvious component to it. So I hang out with people like this all the time. So these are the random people who do jailbreaking type work. And this picture is like POSIX Ninja and GeoHot. I do not myself typically come up with exploits. I've helped occasionally with the construction of specific exploit tools. On Android, I like work on coming up with better techniques, and I implement them and release tools for them. I don't typically come up with exploits, but I do help out in the, like, as I said before, why I went through my job title. I am a community manager. I am like developer outreach and coordination. I am constantly trying to make the lives of these people actually work. Now, to like focus on, I'd love it. It's always got to get a picture with the phone, right? This is Charlie Miller, GeoHot, and PlanetBeam. But I'm actually going to focus quickly on one person in particular, Comex, with his website Jailbreak.me. So Jailbreak.me was a website that allowed you to jailbreak your device. It looked like the App Store. You clicked install like the App Store. This is Safari. Safari closes, and just like the App Store, Sadia starts installing as an icon on another page with a progress bar that's loading. He spent, I think, 8 months on this. It's like a masterpiece of his. And the way in which, like the complexity that goes behind the scenes with relation to getting this process to work without any reboots, without any crashes, without any like black screens or anything is actually really complicated. I'm not going into that. Instead, I'm going to point out the bug that he used to take control of Safari, which is a bug in the TrueType font render, which is free type, which was in their hinting engine, which is a part of the code which takes blurry text and tries to hammer and chisel it into broken looking text, which some people prefer blurry, some people prefer broken. But that hinting engine had a bug in it which allowed you to take control of the process, and Comex utilized that, and he released, because in his ethical system, he released an open source implementation of it, co-released with the bug, and we had this awesome open source jailbreak that installed Sadia, and all people were doing all sorts of cool fun stuff with it. Something, however, that needs to be noted is that this bug isn't just on an iPhone. This bug is in FreeType, which is the font render used on X, the Linux desktop environment. This is the font render that is used by Foxit Reader. This is the font render that is used by Firefox in a lot of situations. This is the font render that is used by numerous other products and applications people might be using. An email client you might be using might have been subjected to this bug. And so while I always come up here and I talk about how jailbreaking is the ability for users to use custom wallpapers, custom icons, make custom modifications to their system, jailbreaking is in fact the process of weaponizing exploits of zero-day vulnerabilities so users might construct modified experiences and might have different wallpaper and might change a bunch of icons. But in the process, we do end up having the side effect, which is this weaponized exploit, a tool that anyone in the audience, maybe a spouse that you were having a quarrel with, that you're now separated from, who's now like trying to stalk you or something, they are now in the position because we made it so easy to be able to take your device and be able to hack into it. Now, this is a very different ethics from other people in our security community. Jeff Forrestall, in fact, who I'm supposed to be doing some work for like right now, and I just instead giving this talk, but hopefully he won't mind, because I put his picture in here, right? He's responsible for the first publicized responsible security disclosure policy. He found a bug actually last year, the Android master key bug, which he gave a talk at Black Hat about. The talk at Black Hat, he gave a bunch of time coordinating with Google in order to make certain that a bunch of devices weren't fixed. By the way, those devices weren't fixed. Android never fixes anything. Samsung did. Samsung's actually apparently pretty proactive about this stuff. And I mean, Google's own devices weren't fixed. But by the time he gave his talk, I had actually already released an implementation of the bug. Because I figured out what the bug was, and I built a tool for it. And actually, I waited because I wanted to make certain. My moral was actually kind of interesting. Well, I wanted to make certain not to waste a bug. So I waited until we were certain which bug Jeff was using to make certain that I didn't build an implementation with another bug that I had, because I was sitting on one. So I built a tool. He actually ended up not releasing a tool because mine ended up supporting more functionality than the one that he was intending to build. But we get along. And this is, I think, an interesting point to make, is that despite the fact that he has kind of an opposite moral to me and he approaches the problem in an opposite way that I do, we can work together and we're cool together. And I think that that's where things get really complicated with ethics. Is I think that the hard part of ethics, the part where ethics aren't easy, is when you're in a situation where you've got two ethics that kind of conflict and you're honestly not even certain to yourself at what really makes 100% sense to you. So you might ask, why do I continue to do the one that I do? I look at a bunch of children. By the way, that's I'm supposed to cite this picture, honest to God. It says I'm supposed to cite it like that. So I really care about children being able to learn to utilize computer technology. And this is something where when I was a child, I learned how to program and I learned how to do all this stuff. I started in my elementary school. We were using the Apple IIc running Apple Basic, and it had a logo on it. We actually had like this physical machine, like robotic turtle that would attach to it that you could control from the computer. I just found the whole thing so exciting. But honestly, I didn't I learned to kind of program, but programming didn't become something I did. It didn't become something I was until later on when I had access to things like Visual Basic on the computer that we had at home, and I had a TI calculator, which is a functional device. It's something that you get a child so that they can do math homework. It's something that is a single function device, ostensibly. I mean, it's something that's supposed to do math calculations, but it is fully programmable, and in fact, it's not just programmable by one user sitting at it. It's programmable by one user sitting at it, and then you can transfer those programs to other users. And so you end up with kids writing programs, and distributing programs, and building cool stuff. Now, some of the stuff that ends up getting built, maybe ways to cheat on math homework or something like that. Not necessarily cheat, not learn the techniques because the program's doing it for you. But the people who are doing that are still learning something particularly interesting about how programming and how like computers and computing and stuff work. I actually got an exemption from my math teacher. She was like, you can program anything you want. You can use it on the test if you want, because I at least know you programmed it. But children today are actually utilizing iPod Touch 4th generations, and because these are the previous device that a lot of times the parents got, and now they've upgraded to something else. They even may have gotten this free. I actually know a lot of people who got an iPod Touch free when they bought a MacBook, and they give the iPod to the kid. And then the iPod, this is their computer. This is the one that they own. And I say, this is a computer. This isn't a music player. This is the computer that they own. And a lot of kids jailbreak their iPhones, jailbreak their iPods in order to be able to program for it, in order to be able to manipulate it and do stuff. And we actually, there are people who continue to maintain on-device tool chains, so you can actually program on the iPod, and you can compile on the iPod in case your house doesn't even own a Mac. Maybe you've got the house has a Windows computer, using some way of connecting to the computer. This is actually a way that people have been learning to program. Another device, by the way, that I had when I was young was a Game Genie, which I bring up because one of my focuses has always been runtime code modification. And the Game Genie is runtime code modification for a Nintendo. It is a way where you can plug a device between the cartridge and the Nintendo, and it will intercept all of the address bus and then change the data bus in order to do hard code memory, which is effectively which you can use to effectively modify the computer program to, for example, make it so that Mario is always swimming when he's supposed to be running around, or to make it so that when Mario dies, he doesn't lose a life, or Mario is always invincible, or Mario runs 3 times as fast as he's supposed to be able to. And these are like fun things to play with, and you can actually end up learning a lot about how computers work if you go deep in this. Even if you don't go deep in this, I think this is a really interesting way of thinking about how software works, how you interface with software, which is that it's a way where software is another thing that you own that you get to modify, much like if you bought a shirt and you want to change the way, you want to cut the sleeves off because you actually want like a kind of ripped look tank top or something. I don't know, I don't do clothing modification. You can do that. I guess that people do silly stuff with jeans all the time, right? Cut off jeans, I guess that makes more sense. Cut off shirt. In some ways, I tend to look at this as kind of like writing fan fiction for software, and this is in fact a whole other talk that I'm giving next week, because that's what I do. I travel around, I give talks. Now, luckily, I'm not the only person who thinks that this is actually like a good thing to be doing. The Electronic Frontier Foundation is an entire organization of people who at least seem to mostly believe that the things that I and other people who are in the jailbreak community do is actually a good thing and not some horribly, horrendously evil thing that is harming society. And every 3 years, we have to go to the DMCA hearings in order to attempt to maintain an exemption that I don't even think we need in the first place, honestly. I think that we're covered, but we still try to get this exemption. And we have to get it every 3 years in order to keep the DMCA from clamping down on jailbreaking. But again, I don't think we need this. The reason I bring this up, though, is because our exemption has actually never covered us. Our exemption covers iPhones. It doesn't cover iPods. It doesn't cover iPads. Maybe you can make an argument that it sort of covers an iPod, but like the iPad is a tablet. They actually explicitly denied tablets in 2012. So in 2015, we're doing this again, and we're going to end up having to make an argument again for trying to expand the scope of what we're doing with device hacking and modification and tinkering. I might ask, because I'm always trying to come up with something I can actually ask people to do, a call to action at the end of a talk, to please write comments. And I can't believe I did that in 45 minutes. Okay. There's time for, I guess, one half of a question. Not that there's probably a question. Okay. Thank you.